Whether it's Gretzky's 99 or Lemieux's 66, the number a player wears is part of their identity. But not every player has a number to himself. Most share with other players. We thought it was time to settle this, and who better to decide than the NHL.com writers? They voted on every number, 1 to 99. Some were unanimous, and some were close calls. We'll reveal the results and bring in some familiar faces to give their thoughts. It's time to debate who wore it best. Welcome to the final episode of NHL's Who Wore It Best. We started at 99, and now we're down to the final 10, and with so many great players to discuss, in this final episode, we go a whole hour, and we bring out major star power. Brian Burke and Pierre McGuire are with us. To start at number 10, Pierre, who are you going with?
Well, Tony, I had the privilege of being part of the same organization that Ronnie Francis was part of, 2 Stanley Cups, 91 and 92 in Pittsburgh. I was on the management coaching side. Ronnie was on the playing side. He was pretty darn good. But then I look at Pavel Bure as part of the coaching staff that had to drop game plans to shut him down. Not easy to do, Tony. But as a kid growing up in Montreal, I got to tell you, it's hard for me in my heart and in my mind to go against the great Guy LaFleur. 5 cups for Guy LaFleur, 50 or more goals, and 100 more points. 6 straight seasons, the first ever NHL player to ever do that. 3 Art Ross trophies, 2 Hart trophies, 1 Conn Smythe, 4 cups in a row to go along with the 5 that he won overall. But here's the one thing that stands out about Guy. If you go back to the legendary Game 7, Boston-Montreal, 1979, nothing personifies Guy LaFleur and the Montreal Canadiens from that era better than that game-tying goal, time running out, Canadians on the power play, Jacques Lemaire passes on the back diagonal of Guy LaFleur, and he blows it by Gilles Joubert. That's why I'm taking Guy LaFleur, the flying Frenchman personified.
Pierre McGuire comes out flying. That was brilliantly put. Brian Burke, are you also going with Guy LaFleur at 10?
No, I love Guy LaFleur, and one thing people don't know is he's done a lot for the Canadian Forces since he quit playing. He and Pavel Bure are 2 of the best pure goal scorers that ever played the game. But Ronnie Francis was a much more complete player. Guy LaFleur never won a Selke, never got a vote for a Selke, but Ronnie Francis did. So if you look at the body of work, Ronnie Francis ended up with 1,249 assists, 1,798 points. That's way more than Guy, 600 more than Guy, I think. Guy LaFleur, great goal scorer. Ronnie Francis, 200-foot player, good defensively, could kill penalties, put up big numbers, big body, much more complete player. So Pavel Bure, great player. Guy LaFleur, great player. Ronnie Francis, the best that wore the number 10.
Ronnie franchise, of course, is leading the new Seattle franchise. And Seattle fans, you got yourself a gem. Now, Brian Burke, over the course of your years as a general manager, you did more than your share of finding gems. The Russian Rocket. There are a lot of people that may not remember just how critical your role was in getting him into the National Hockey League. He wasn't your pick, but my goodness, what a player he turned out to be.
Yeah, so that year in '89, he was ruled ineligible for the draft because you had to have played 10 games in the Elite League in your home country. The Russians put out a sheet that said he only played 9. Mike Penny, the Canucks chief scout, got game sheets from 2 additional games that Pavel had played in St. Petersburg. And so we took him in the 6th round. A big uproar came out from the guys actually rushed the stage screaming at Jimmy Gregory and saying they can't take him. So the league registered the pick, but said they would investigate it. Almost 1 year later, the night before the 1990 entry draft, they awarded Pavel Bure to the Vancouver Canucks, who then the next morning drafted Peter Nedved and Sean Antoski in the 1st round.
That Brian Burke guy, pretty good at his job. And the idea that you'd be involved in an uproar, shocking. Just kidding. Little sarcasm there. No sarcasm here. When we bring in Mr. Stubbs, there's no one who knows more about the history of this league. Let's hear what the voters had to say, the panel of writers from NHL.com. Oh, Dave, rocking the bow tie. Very sharp. What was the final decision? Who wore it best all time? Number 10.
Flying Frenchman, Tony, Guy LaFleur. Look, you're a French Canadian. You've been a superstar sniper and junior. You arrive in Montreal upon the retirement of Jean Beliveau, who had succeeded Maurice Rocket Richard. No pressure, right? Just another French Canadian kid comes in, plays hockey in Montreal. 29, 28, 21 goals in his first 3 seasons. But LaFleur's next 6 seasons, 53, 56, 56, 60, 52, 50 goals. Habs fans, knowing them, probably figured that 50-goal season was a slump. Guy Lafleur's first roommate was Henri Richard, and the pocket rocket told him, listen, whatever Scotty tells you, just ignore him. Just play your own game. And that's what he did. And Toe Blake told Scotty many times that there were 4 guys who Toe had seen in his lifetime who could lift a fan out of his seats. And they were Howie Morenz, Maurice Richard, Bobby Hull, and Guy Lafleur. So that's not bad company.
Not since Chuck Daly coached the Dream Team in Barcelona has there been this kind of assemblage of talent. Stubbs, Pierre, and Burke bringing it in our first segment. We're going to take our first time out. When we come back, we talk numbers 9 and 8. At number 9, talking about legends like Gordie Howe, Mr. Hockey, Maurice Richard, and Bobby Hull. And then at number 8, the Great 8, Alex Ovechkin, Teemu Selanne, Cam Neely, NHLs. Who were at best? We'll come right back. Welcome back to NHL's Who Wore It Best. Here we have arrived at number 9 on the countdown, and Keith Jones has joined us. He played over 500 games in the National Hockey League. Who am I to try and influence you? We're doing a hockey countdown show on Who Wore It Best. There was a guy that wore number 9 that was Mr. Hockey. Jonesy, please tell me you're going with Gordie Howe.
I am, Tony. Mr. Hockey is my choice. And number 9 was a very popular number when I was a kid growing up, and it all had to do with Gordie Howe. Great players have worn number 9. Dave just talked about Maurice Richard, Bobby Hull. Scotty Bowman thought they were guys that could bring you out of your seat. Well, Gordie Howe could put you on your seat, on the seat of your pants, score a goal, throw an elbow at the same time, and put the fear in the opponents. I just absolutely loved everything that I saw from Gordie Howe and the videos that I watched of him play, and deserving of the title of Mr. Hockey. Gordie Howe is my selection.
Brian Burke, where do you stand on number 9? Who wore it best all time?
Well, it might be one of the best numbers in the history of the NHL. I mean, you got Bobby Hull, 600 plus goals, who lost 7 years to the WHA, or it would have been 700 goals. Great player. Rocket Richard, who is before all of our time, but passage of time shouldn't obscure the memory of a great player. He was a great competitor, great player. But I'm with Jonesy. I worked with Mr. Howe when I was in Hartford. This guy was a great player, longevity, put up numbers, won titles, won trophies. But the other thing was people were terrified of him. This is a guy, the Gordie Howe hat trick survives to this day. He was a great man, a great ambassador for the game. It was an honor to work with him. But I'm with Jonesy. This is the best number 9 that ever played in the NHL. And I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't think anyone's ever going to pass him.
That is high praise. There's a guy named Wayne Gretzky sitting in a mansion right now watching this show, and he's nodding because, of course, Mr. Hockey, his all-time favorite. Dave Stubbs, please tell us it's unanimous. The writers, how did you see it? Who wore it best, number 9?
Tony, not only is it unanimous on this panel, but it was unanimous with the NHL.com writers. Clean sweep. Mr. Hockey, the Rocket, the Golden Jet, maybe the holy trinity of the original 6, and maybe the holy trinity of nicknames too. I mean, those were great nicknames. None of these guys debuted in number 9, but they all played a role, of course, in immortalizing it. Here's a quick story about the Rocket. He struggled in his rookie season wearing number 15. His daughter was born. She weighed 9 pounds. So the Rocket goes to his coach, Dick Irvin, and says, could I have number 9? And Dick says, sure. So Rocket pulls on number 9, and you know what he did with it. Well, of course, in today's day up here in Canada, we're in the metric system. So Rocket's daughter would have been 4 kilograms. And the number 4 was worn rather illustriously by another member of the Montreal Canadiens. Wayne Gretzky calls Gordie not just his favorite player, but the greatest ever. So 78-79, Wayne is 17 with the WHA's Indianapolis Racers. Gordie's with the New England Whalers. He recalls Gordie winking at him during the warm-up, and he thinks, that's pretty cool. Mr. Hockey's winking at a young kid like me. So a third or fourth shift, Wayne takes the puck from Gordie, who then gives him a slash across the hand, nearly breaks his thumb, and says, don't ever take the puck from me again. And he gets a, yes, sir, I won't. Well, of course, Wayne goes into the dressing room between periods. He says, I don't know what that was all about. And his goalie, Suitcase Smith, says, Gordie wasn't winking. He has a twitchy eye. So, I mean, that was the first meeting that Wayne Gretzky really had with Mr. Hockey, and you know how great friends they became over the years and how the two of them really became one and the same in a lot of ways.
Dave Stubbs, amazing stories, and I am thrilled, and every hockey fan can agree that Mr. Hockey deserved to be the guy at number 9. On to number 8. I turn to our panelists and I say, There's a guy in the league right now called the Grade 8 who's won 9 Rockets. Heath Jones, does that influence you?
It does, and so does his play on the ice. I've enjoyed watching Alex play the game since he arrived in the National Hockey League. I've really enjoyed watching him play over the last 5 or 6 years, including his Stanley Cup championship with the Washington Capitals. The power game, he seems to be tireless. He continues to power through opposition defenders who try to slow him down. The shot is phenomenal. It looks like you'd be able to figure it out on how to defend him. Nobody can. He finds unique ways to score, and he finds the same way to score. He continues to blast away, and in my eyes is the best to ever wear number 8, and it's not an easy number. Cam Neely was one of my favorite players to watch play the game. Powerful, much like Ovechkin. Shot like Ovechkin, did not have the longevity of Ovechkin, so Ovechkin gets the nod from me.
Brian, you've said you've lost sleep over some of these selections. Was number 8 one of those for you?
Yeah, and if Cam Neely was here, I wouldn't admit I was picking somebody else if he was in the room. I'm with Jonesy. It's Alex Ovechkin, and keep in mind, he's hot on the trail for the all-time record despite 2 lockouts and a pause. This is a guy who lost the whole year and half another year and 15% or roughly 12 games, whatever he missed this year, and he's still in the hunt for that all-time goal record. And he's physical. He's been a great blessing for our league. This guy's a showman. People pay to watch Alex Ovechkin. Honorable mention to Cam Neely, who's a marvelous player and tougher than a night in jail. Teemu Selanne, who I had in Anaheim, won a cup with him. Great player. Very similar to career to Alex Ovechkin's, where he had great individual success, but no team success till about the 14th year of his career, almost like Alex. And then Drew Doughty, who we'll talk about in more glowing terms down the road. He ain't in this class yet.
Tougher than a night in jail made me laugh out loud. I was not laughing at the other players whose credentials are great. Dave Stubbs, how did the writers see it? NHL.com's panel of experts. Number 8 all-time, who wore it best?
Alex Ovechkin. We had 17 of 19 first place votes for him. Teemu Selanne got a couple. Has Ovi got enough racetrack to catch Gretzky for number 1 spot on the all-time goals list? That's certainly one of the compelling stories as we move forward. Ovi can score from anywhere, as Jonesy mentioned. Everyone knows he's going to shoot from his office on the edge of the circle, yet everyone seems totally powerless to stop him. He'd be my number 1 all-time number 8, purely just for the fun he has scoring goals, whether it's preseason or Stanley Cup final. No one seems to enjoy scoring a goal more. And the fun that he had with a cup in the summer after the Capitals won it, I think they had to boil the Stanley Cup after he was done with it. I mean, Ovi had that thing everywhere. Selanne, Neely, Doughty all wore or wear number 8 with distinction. Burke, you mentioned Cam, not wanting to tell him. Have you ever seen Cam in the TD Garden freight elevator after a Bruins loss? I have, and you know what? I'm not going to tell him he didn't win this vote either.
Fascinating info as always from Dave Stubbs. Quick break here on Who Wore It Best. When we return, numbers 7 and 6. We're talking Espo, Lindsay, Coffee. And then at number 6, Phil Housley and his legendary lid, Toe and Shea. And you know we're talking about Weber's bomb from the blue line. That's when NHL's Who Wore It Best returns. Welcome back to NHL's Who Wore It Best. We are at number 7, which is considered a lucky number, but Jonesy and Pierre, it's unlucky to have to choose from the great players who wore this sweater. Pierre, who are you going with?
Well, I'm going to start with some of the players that I really respect that wore number 7. The great Howie Morenz. He was the first human highlight reel. Passed away at age 34. Complications from a broken leg sustained in a game. Paul Coffey, who had the privilege of working with in Pittsburgh. Nobody skated quicker from the back end to the front end than Paul Coffey. He was magical when he was in his prime. Terrible Ted Lindsay. I heard so many chapter and verse stories about terrible Ted Lindsay and how fearless he was and how many people around the National Hockey League he would battle, including the great Morris Rocket Richard. But I've got to go with Phil Esposito. When you think about it, 18 years in the National Hockey League. And Jonesy, you won't believe this. The first man to ever get 100 points in the National Hockey League was Phil Esposito in 1969. Nobody had ever scored 100 points in a season. He won 5 Art Ross trophies, 2 Hart trophies, 2 Stanley Cups. But I will always remember him for what he did in the 1972 Summit Series for Canada and the way he led Canada from behind going into that unbelievable 4-game stretch over in Russia. And without him, I don't think Canada wins. So to me, it's got to be Phil Esposito.
It's a great choice, Pierre, and I also am in agreement with you. I love the way Phil Esposito played the game. I loved his ability to score from the front of the net. He paid a heavy price, took a lot of cross-checks at a time when this game was very difficult to play with that style. Defenders were kind of given a green light to knock you down, and you better get back up, and Phil did all of that. I can imagine in that 100-point season that there wasn't very many highlight reel goals or assists along the way. That's what Phil Esposito did. All he did was produce. He was an extremely productive goal scorer, and he had a great personality. I was a huge Paul Coffey fan. He would have been my second choice. I love to watch Paul play the game. I thought he was ahead of his time. I think he would have been unbelievable to watch in today's game. But Phil Esposito, in agreement with you, Pierre, was the best guy to wear number 7.
And I love that Pierre brought up that Summit Series in 72 when Espo spoke from the heart to all of Canada and all of the hockey world. The Soviets were for real. Dave Stubbs, is it unanimous? The writers, how did you see it?
We're agreeing a whole lot today, aren't we? Yeah, of course, Phil Esposito. Phil's arrival in Boston from Chicago in May of 67 with Kenny Hodge and Fred Stanfield put the wheels in motion for the Bruins 70 and 72 Stanley Cup championships. His firepower was incredible, and he had fire in his belly to match. Few have ever played the game with Espo's intensity. Pierre mentioned the Summit Series. I'd suggest that no one has ever played a better period of hockey ever than Phil did in the third period of Game 8 in Moscow, the 72 Summit Series versus the Soviets. He was not going to let Canada lose, period. All of this said, my vote would go to Ted Lindsay. Terrible Ted played 6 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier than his 5'8", 165. This man was as ferocious as he came. He always battled out of his weight class. Great personal sacrifice to help establish the NHLPA. No one with stronger principles. Teddy boycotted his own Hockey Hall of Fame induction in 1966 because wives and girlfriends were not invited to attend. The Hall changed the policy. Teddy attended the next year, and he did not miss one the rest of his life.
Goosebump stuff, as always, from Dave Stubbs. My goodness, great info there. And our countdown rolls on now to number 6. Keith Jones, Shea Weber, wearing number 6 for Canada, hit a puck so hard, drove it through the net at the Olympics. I say again, through the net. How about him at number 6? Is he your choice?
He is my choice, Tony. Great lead there, and a lot of it has to do with that shot. I mean, an incredible blast from the point, a tough defender. I loved his mean streak. I loved his offensive capabilities. I love his leadership. All the things that Shea Weber brought to the table have separated him from a lot of guys to wear number 6. What I like most about Shea Weber's game is he's a great complement to any partner, and you throw him in the Olympics and he is the top D-man automatically just based upon how he loves to step up in some of the biggest moments. But most importantly, his mental toughness have gone a long way. Banged up over the last few seasons. That's unfortunate, but he's still a great player, and I've always enjoyed watching him wear number 6.
Pierre, what about you and your perspective on number 6? Who are you choosing?
I love what Keith Jones just said about the versatility of Shea Weber, Tony. I'm not picking Shea Weber, though, and I respect Phil Housley a ton, coming out of South St. Paul High School. First-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres, magnificent career. Went to the Stanley Cup final in 98 with the Washington Capitals, and that's as close as he ever came to winning the Cup. But I'm going with somebody that maybe most of us didn't see play, but I can tell you the legend of Toe Blake is larger than life. From Coniston, Ontario, just outside of Sudbury, Ontario, comes down, plays for the Montreal Maroons, wins a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Maroons before he wins 2 Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens. Plays on one of the most iconic lines of all time, the punch line, with Elmer Locke and with Rocket Richard. A dominant line for the Montreal Canadiens in the 40s and into parts of the 50s. But the biggest thing to me about Toe Blake, 8 years, not 1, not 2, not 3, 8 years as a captain of the Montreal Canadiens, 2 Stanley Cups, and then he goes on to coach, and he coaches for 13 years, Tony, and he wins 8 Stanley Cups in 13 years. So to me, having not seen him very much as a player, meeting him as a person, though, I would just go with Toe Blake.
And you knew he was an iconic figure in hockey because he was mentioned in Slapshot. Here's a writer who captures the spirit of the thing every time. Dave Stubbs. Who did the writers vote for and agree upon as the player that wore it best all time, number 6?
Tony, we like Phil Housley. 12 of 19 first place votes. Toe Blake had 7. If we hadn't voted for Housley, I'm pretty sure that all of us at NHL.com would be barred from Buffalo for life. Terrific forward in minor hockey. As Pierre mentioned, switched to defense in high school. His high school coach said everything seems to go in slow motion for him. He wouldn't jet by people. He'd just move by them. He used those great offensive skills from the back end. Toe Blake was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a player, not as a coach, of course, not as a builder. 3 cups with the Maroons and the Canadiens. His greater fame, as Pierre said, was winning the Stanley Cup 8 times with the Canadiens in 13 seasons. Shea Weber, of course, wears number 6 in Montreal now with really, really fine numbers and just a great towering presence on this team. That said, when Weber one day vacates it, I want Toe Blake's number 6 retired by the Montreal Canadiens. He was left wing on the punch line, the preeminent line of the 40s. Let's reunite the punch line of the rafters. The Rocket's up there. Elmer Locke is up there. We need that punch line back together, reunited in the rafters of the Bell Center.
Well said by Dave Stubbs. We're going to take a break here on NHL's Who Wore It Best. Straight ahead, number 5 and number 4. Stay with us. Welcome back to NHL's Who Wore It Best. Pierre McGuire and Brian Burke along with us. And we've arrived at number 5. Some marvelous choices here. Pierre, who's your choice?
Well, it would have been very easy for me to pick Boom Boom Geoffrion, who's the father of the slap shot. He got into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1972, won 6 cups with Montreal. But out of respect, I can't take Boom Boom. I would love Denny Potvin, especially watching Denny play as an Ottawa 67 when I was a little kid, and then obviously with the New York Islanders. But I've got to go with Nick Lidstrom. For 20 years, the king of stability in Detroit, captain for 6 of those 20, 4 Stanley Cups, 7 Norris trophies, 1 Conn Smythe. The 06 Olympics, I know everybody trumpets Henrik Lundqvist for being the goalie for Sweden. They don't win without Nick Lidstrom. And that was huge because that was against Finland. That wasn't against the Czechs. That wasn't against the Russians. Wasn't against Canada. It was against Finland, their detested rival. So to me, it's Nick Lidstrom. He wore number 5 with grace, dignity, and a whole lot of class.
Very well put. Brian Burke, are you in agreement with Pierre?
You know what? I think Nick Lidstrom probably wore it best, but I'm going to go with Denny Potvin, only so I can disagree with Pierre once in a while. No, with Denny Potvin, I think the problem is he gets overlooked because he played in the same era with a guy named Bure. If you look back, he's Calder Trophy winner, 4 cups, 3 Norris trophies. But what I respect about Denny Potvin was this guy would knock you down, skate right over you, couldn't care less. This guy was a big hitter. He could fight. I love Nick Lidstrom. I watched his team decimate my team many nights. I would agree with Pierre. I think this is the hardest one for me, but I'm going Denny Potvin.
From one end of the spectrum to a writer who's as nice as they come. Dave Stubbs joins us now to let us know who the writers selected.
Tony, we like Nick Lidstrom. Very close to unanimous. 17 of 19 first place votes. Denny Potvin had 2. When Lidstrom arrived with Detroit, he admitted he didn't know an awful lot about the Red Wings franchise, and he asked if he could have number 9. And he was told, no, probably not. But he seemed to do okay with 5, right? 7 Norris trophies, 1 fewer than Bobby Orr. He's a European trailblazer. We talk about a player being ageless. 4 Norris trophies after age 35. Only Ray Bourque had better numbers in the blue line than Lidstrom after his 30th birthday. Denny Potvin, captain of those great Islander dynasties in the 80s. Retired as the NHL's leading defenseman for goals, assists, and points in the Boomer. What are you going to say about him? As Pierre said, 6 cups in Montreal. He was as spotlight shy and unassuming in his day as maybe PK Subban is today, right? Great player, also famous for his perm, his cheesy beer commercials, and for drilling goalie Eddie Jackman in the throat with a shot live on Johnny Carson in 1966.
As I always say, no one knows more about hockey than Dave Stubbs. Now it's on to number 4. There cannot be a tougher selection. At least that's what I'm thinking, because my wife insisted I show. Her favorite wedding gift came from Scott Stevens and his lovely wife, Brian Burke. Is Scott Stevens your choice at number 4?
Well, he buys nice wedding gifts, but unfortunately he's not. I'll talk about Scott briefly, though. Everyone remembers his cups and this big hitting guy, but this guy was a really good player. He had really respectable point totals, particularly early in his career. He had big point years early in his career. But I'm going with Bobby Orr. Bobby Orr, you're talking about a guy who changed the game. Hart trophies, Norris trophies, Calder trophy, 2 rings. This guy was elegant. He had 39 fights in his career. He was tough. He was physical. And he would have played another 7 or 8 years if our medical science had been more advanced. Greatest player that ever played the game for me, Bobby Orr.
And one of those fights, Tony, was against Brian's old boss, the late, great Pat Quinn. And that was a very tough guy to have to square up with. I have so much respect for Scott Stevens, the way he carried himself as an NHL player. I don't think he's in this debate only because of the greatness of Bobby Orr and Jean Beliveau. Jean Beliveau, Tony, 20 years in the National Hockey League, 10 cups as a player, 7 as an executive with the Montreal Canadiens. So you think about that over the course of his career. But here's something that no other players ever had happen to him. Frank Selke Sr. and the Montreal Canadiens organization had to buy the Quebec Senior League to turn Jean Beliveau pro from the Quebec Aces. He was making more money in Quebec than he would have playing for the Montreal Canadiens, so he just stayed there. So they said, okay, we'll just buy the league and we'll own you. And that's exactly what they did. But the rest is history. But I'm with Brian Burke on this. It's hard to go against Bobby Orr's 8 Norris trophies. Think about this. He led the National Hockey League in plus-minus 6 straight years. That's unheard of. That's almost impossible. And he did revolutionize the game. And it's hard to say that he's not the best defenseman that ever lived.
Understanding that you selected Bobby Orr at number 4, I know, Brian, there's somebody you feel very strongly about that also wore that number.
Well, we've had players play more than one position in the National Hockey League, but no one's been a star at more than one position except Red Kelly, who was a star on defense, was a star on forward. This guy won 8 cups, the most cups any player has won in the history of the NHL that did not play for the Montreal Canadiens. And running the Leafs, one of the great things about that is you get to meet these great alumni. So I got to know Mr. Kelly. What a gentleman.
Great stuff there. Let's bring in Dave Stubbs and find out if the writers chose Kelly or who are at best all time. Number 4. Was it Bobby Orr?
It was indeed. 18 first place votes, 1 for Mr. Beliveau. What can you say about Bobby? I mean, he was ridiculous. He redefined the position. He played it in a way that hadn't been seen before or since. There are no superlatives left, right? I mean, people talk about Bobby, you just run out of adjectives. I can't even imagine what he would have done in the era of knee scopes. Can you imagine if he hadn't had his knee carved open as many times as he did? Jean Beliveau is only the most graceful, gracious, humble superstar I've known my entire life. He was a hero of my youth. And you know, sometimes you don't want to meet your hero later in your life for fear they're not going to live up to that person you've made them out to be. They're not going to be fitting of the pedestal you put them on. Well, Jean Beliveau was worthy of a pedestal that's much higher than I had for him. To all, including many opponents, he was Mr. Beliveau. When Ted Lindsay spoke of Jean Beliveau, he would stand up out of respect for number 4, Jean Beliveau. So he was the gold standard, not just as good as you've always heard him to be, but better. But Bobby Orr in a class by himself and certainly worthy of all-time number 4.
This show has been so marvelous, and the countdown continues. When we return, we get to number 3 and number 2. NHL's Who Wore It Best? Come right back. Welcome back to NHL's Who Wore It Best? The countdown winding down. Brian Burke and Keith Jones, we are at number 3. I've been blown away throughout the entire run of this show by how much research our experts have done. Same story here at number 3. Burke, you made a number of phone calls in order to make your choice. Please tell us about it.
Well, I'm not a young man, and these guys were all before my time. So I called 3 guys from the era right before my era and asked them. So I called Glenn Sather, Harry Sinden, and Don Cherry. And I put this to them, and they said, without question in their mind, Harry Howell, a great two-way defenseman, great passer, won the last Norris Trophy, famously commented, Bobby Orr is going to win it for the next 8 years, which he did. But Harry Howell was a really important player, a really good defenseman. Stay at home. And I want to mention Marcel Pronovo, who won 5 cups, star in Detroit, star in Toronto, elite defender, really good player. But these 3 guys didn't hesitate. They said, this is the guy, and Jonesy's going to talk about Pierre a lot.
I did a little bit of homework, Tony. I went to Western Michigan. We didn't study very hard there, but I did talk to Brian Burke, and he informed me that Pierre Pilote won 3 Norris trophies while playing defense for the Chicago Blackhawks. He was a runner-up 3 times as well. He won a Stanley Cup in 1961 and was named captain of the Blackhawks the following season. He was a very good National Hockey League defenseman and worthy of being in the discussion as the best to wear number 3. But Harry Howell is the right choice. Harry Howell's career was phenomenal, and Brian Burke explained it beautifully, and I would agree with him. I would rely on those three gentlemen that he talked to, three guys that know their way around a rink.
Let's get Dave Stubbs in. He knows his way around the rink and NHL history to find out who the writers selected.
Hate to be the stick in the spokes of this panel, but they went with Pierre Pilote. 10 of 18 first place votes, comfortably ahead of Harry and Marcel, but the vote was kind of nicely split. So, I mean, Harry, of course, is a great Jeopardy answer. And the Jeopardy question is, who was the last winner of the Norris before Bobby claimed it as his own, basically just built his own trophy case for it. Harry was a pillar on the Rangers blue line, probably the last defensive defenseman to win the Norris in 66, 67. There's a great story about Pierre Pilote that he gave up trying to correct, that he knocked out brothers Rocket and Henri Richard in a single 1950s fight. Never happened, but Pierre enjoyed people telling him that it did happen. And in fact, it's even on the back of one of his hockey cards. So it's got to be true, right? Like Dickie Dunn, Slapshot. If he wrote it, it's got to be true. Tremendous leader on the Blackhawks. Norris 3 times consecutively, 61 Cup, and a tough cuss. 7 times he was in the top 10 in penalty minutes. And maybe the best fact about Pierre Pilote is that the C that was sewn on his sweater when he was named captain of the Blackhawks was sewn on the wrong side of the jersey. It was sewn on the right, not over his heart. That was corrected, but that is immortalized in a Pierre Pilote bobblehead that you can find out there somewhere.
Dave Stubbs, we're so happy we found you for all of your facts. My goodness. Now it's on to number 2. And Brian Burke, you're a national treasure. You've been so instrumental in USA Hockey's growth and ascendancy to the elite. Here we have a candidate at number 2 in Brian Leetch, first American to win the Conn Smythe. Is that who you're picking?
No. I'm going with Doug Harvey. And I'm going to talk about Eddie Shore first, because you can't talk about this number without talking about Eddie Shore. I had the pleasure of meeting Eddie Shore when I first turned pro and was playing in Springfield. Eddie Shore won the Hart Trophy 4 times. That's the most of any defenseman in the history of the NHL. He played 5 years in the league before they instituted all-star teams at the end of the year, and then he made the all-star team 7 of his next 9 seasons. Great player, legendary toughness, went on to be a controversial owner of Springfield in the American League. I'm really honored I met him, but I'm going with Doug Harvey. And when I talked to Sather and Sinden and Cherry, they didn't hesitate. You know, other than Bobby Orr, they were like, Doug Harvey was Orr before Orr. That was the high praise. Like, this guy could really play, move the puck, lug the puck at a time when defensemen didn't really do it that much, and he was tough. This guy was legitimate tough. So they said without question, Doug Harvey was one of the best, according to Harry Sinden, in the top 3 that ever played. And I'm assuming he puts Orr and Bork and Harvey as his top 3. This guy could play.
I would agree with Berkey on the Doug Harvey part. It's the complete package that he brought to the table, the toughness as well at a time when you absolutely needed that part. For me, Brian Leetch was a phenomenally talented defenseman. I was up against Brian Leetch in '94 in the Rangers Cup run. We played him in Washington the second round, and Brian Leetch scored a series clinching goal with about 3 minutes left at MSG in a 3-3 tie. He walked in and scored one of his patented goals with great skill. A very memorable player. And anytime you played against Brian Leetch, you knew where he was on the ice at all times and tried to stop him. For me, Al MacInnis was the toughest to go against. He actually changed the way you defended because you did not want to get hit by his shot. Number one, I don't know if he knew where it was going, but he knew it was leaving a stick and it was going to be hard. And if you got in the way of it, you could be in some trouble. Goaltenders feared his shot as well. Offensively gifted player, also an extremely competitive player. You weren't going to get the extra shots in against Al MacInnis. He'd give you a good whack if you deserved it, and was not a player that you could generate any momentum against because he was tough to battle and tough to get off the puck. But Doug Harvey is the choice.
Harvey getting tremendous respect from our expert panel. Let's see how the writers saw it. Dave Stubbs, was Harvey the best all time to wear sweater number 2?
Yes, indeed, he was. 13 first-place votes at NHL.com. Brian Leetch with 5. 7 times in Norris for Doug Harvey, tied with Nick Lidstrom, 1 back of Bobby Orr. Berkey, you said he was Bobby Orr before Bobby Orr. That's absolutely true. This guy was a brilliant quarterback on the Canadiens' power play. He could speed up or slow down the game as he saw fit, as the situation dictated. He could head man the puck better than anyone by far. He was the greatest rusher of his day, and he could recover when the puck turned over. His blue line partner, Tommy Johnson, said that he could have basically played any position. He could have played forward. He could have played defense. He probably could have played goal if he had wanted to. And in his autobiography, Jean Beliveau said that Doug Harvey was the best defenseman of his day and, in his view, the best in NHL history. And Jean Beliveau also saw Bobby Orr play. Brian Leetch, mobile, great vision, terrific skater, fine stick handler. Al McInnes, Jonesy, you talked about his shot. Anyone who was foolish enough to try to get in the way of it, their bruises should be healed any day now.
That is funny. And I had no doubt that all those books behind Dave Stubbs, he's read. That's where all the great information comes from, and talking to people around the game. Quick break for us. We're all the way down to number 1 when NHL's Who Wore It Best returns. Welcome back to NHL's Who Wore It Best, and then there was one. We have arrived at the last number on our countdown. All hands on deck. All 3 experts ready to weigh in. One thing everyone in hockey agrees upon, the goalie. So crucial, so vital. And some of the greatest netminders of all time have worn this very number. Bauer, Hall, Luongo, Perron, Jacques Plante, Sawchuk, and this charcuterie cucumber, Georges Vezina. So this is the final number. And I heard Brian Burke say it was the toughest decision. We'll get to him. We'll start with Pierre. Who wore it best, Pierre?
Well, I agree with Brian that it's the toughest decision. That's why I had to call the great Scotty Bowman. And I said to him, you've coached Jacques Plante, you coached Glenn Hall, you coached against Johnny Bauer, you watch Vezina play, you watch Sawchuk play. Who's the best? He goes, I can't tell you the best is, but I can tell you this. Glenn Hall did something that nobody will ever do again, and nobody did before him. 502 straight starts, and that doesn't count preseason games, and that doesn't count playoff games. And he did that without a mask, which is even more unbelievable when you think about it. He won the Calder Trophy. He won 3 Vezina trophies. He won the Conn Smythe in 1968 on a losing St. Louis Blues team to the Montreal Canadiens. And when he goes back to Stony Plain, Alberta, when he doesn't want to go to training camp, he paints his barn red. But one other thing, he also won the Stanley Cup as a coach with the Calgary Flames. To me, Glenn Hall is Mr. Goalie.
They're all legends when you look at this, so it is extremely difficult. I'm going with Johnny Bauer for the number 1 reason being he was the first NHL scout that I ever met. He's taught to me after a junior B game when I was playing for Niagara Falls, and Johnny was scouting for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I could not believe that I was actually in a conversation with Johnny Bauer with the possibility someday of playing for the team that I cheered for as a kid, the Toronto Maple Leafs. For a guy that didn't make his NHL debut until the age of 29 with the Rangers and then spent several more years in the minors before establishing himself for good with the Maple Leafs, Johnny Bauer sure accomplished a lot. He won 2 Vezina trophies and helped lead a great Toronto team to 4 Stanley Cups in the 1960s. Johnny Bauer has to be my pick for number 1.
Sound arguments all around. Brian Burke, where are you going? Number 1, who wore it best?
I'm going with Jacques Plante, but I want to mention George Vezina, who was phenomenal early on in the National Hockey League, just a phenomenal player, died too young at 39 of tuberculosis. And Terry Sawchuk won the Calder Trophy, 4 Vezinas, 4 Stanley Cups, 103 shutouts, great player. But I'm going with Jacques Plante. I knew Jacques Plante. He was the goalie coach for the Flyers when I played in the American League there. 6 cups, 5 of them consecutive, 7 Vezinas, and he revolutionized the game. He was the first goaltender that handled the puck effectively and would move it to defensemen. He was the first goaltender that was vocal with his defenseman, would yell out instructions, and he was the first goaltender to wear a mask on a routine basis. Other goaltenders had worn masks for brief periods when they got hurt or even in practice, but he was the first guy to do it on a regular basis. Totally revolutionized the game. This guy was a great, great player, Hart winner, and retired in 1965, then came back and played for several more years. Best goalie that ever played the game that wore that number.
Brian Burke was right. This number 1, very tough. Dave Stubbs, how did the writers see it?
Tony, if you can bring a prop for number 5, I can bring a prop for number 1.
Yes.
There's your number one choice, Jacques Plante. 10 first place votes ahead of Terry Sawchuk, Johnny Bower, Glenn Hall. Seriously, I mean, with these candidates, there's no best, in my mind. Champions, pioneers, and barefaced lunatics, these guys, right? Plante wasn't the first to wear a mask, as Burke said, but he was the guy who popularized it. He was just a very offbeat kind of guy. He really kind of set the template for goaltenders being weird people. All that he did was win. Sawchuk's in every discussion about the best ever. Johnny Bower was still playing when he was, about 85? Glenn Hall, 502 consecutive games out of mass, 552 including playoffs. Glenn has said, dating back into minors and minor pros, over 1,000 consecutive games. A quick story about Plante. Early 1960s, he accused Chicago, New York, and Boston of having nets smaller than regulation. It drove him nuts because he said that Chicago's Glenn Hall was playing 35 home games in a net that was just a little bit smaller. And with a Vezina Trophy awarded to the team that allowed the fewest goals, he thought that Glenn Hall had the edge. Well, of course, everyone thought he was nuts until someone took out a tape measure. They measured, and sure enough, the crossbar was welded inside the goalposts, not on top. They took out the tape measure, did that. He was right. The crossbar was 2 inches lower, and when he backed into it, he knew where that crossbar touched him in the back. So Glenn Hall, Terry Sawchuk, all these guys, I mean, number one, they're all tremendous, tremendous talents, but Jacques Plante was our choice for the best to wear number one of all time.
Thanks so much, Dave, who brought so much to this. It's been a fascinating exercise, and so much has been added because our experts did such thorough research. To hear your opinions, Brian, Pierre, and Keith, thanks so much. What an awesome experience as a hockey fan to hear what you had to say.
I think it's really important that we remember the history of this great game and the shoulders that built this game up to what it is today. It's an honor to be involved. Thanks for including me.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Brian. A real honor, Tony, to be involved in this kind of a project and to study and really evaluate the history and the greatness of so many players that have participated in the course of the National Hockey League. Keith, I know you had a lot of numbers, so you could have been in all the debate.
Yeah, I was in 4 of them, that's for sure. Whatever other number was going to be available wherever I arrived became my number at 9, 11, 20, 26. Gretzky sent me an email once, signed at 99. I sent him back all 4 of my numbers and made sure that he knew that that's the type of guy I was. I wasn't getting a special number, but these guys deserved it. Incredible players and a lot of great history that we've talked about through the last couple of weeks. Thanks again, Tony.
You guys deserve a sincere thank you. And while the show is over, the debate will rage on. As hockey fans, we can always debate who wore it best.